Before the arrival of European settlers, Native Americans peopled this vast, rugged wilderness. These Native Americans arrived following great herds of elk, bison, and other animals at the end of the last great ice age 10,000 years ago. Even this history, to the end of the last ice age, is a relatively recent history of life on Earth. Throughout the 20th century, residents in northwest Alberta found fossils along the rivers and even in their fields. We also know dinosaurs were here. We found their bones, lots of bones. 70 to 80 million years ago, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, northwest Alberta was a great swampy jungle with an inland sea covering much of the continent of North America.
Dinosaur discoveries were made in this region, of course, back in the 1930s when people like C.M. Sternberg from the National Museum of Canada was out here, ostensibly looking at other fossil resources, but of course looking for the potential of new sites. And at that time the material really wasn't overly exciting, and of course Sternberg spent relatively little time here, but the work was carried on by amateurs and people who were interested in this, and so there was a groundswell of information out there.
One of the early fossil pioneers in this area was George Robinson from the Sexsmith area, pictured here boating on Cluskin Lake. Robinson had an extensive collection of fossils, including many dinosaur fossils found primarily in the Peace region. Much of his collection was eventually donated to museums in Alberta. The Grand Prairie Pioneer Museum has field notes documenting his finds and a number of fossils on display. Robert Cochrane was the most well-known fossil pioneer in the Peace region. He had a very successful farm east of Grand Prairie near the Cluskin Hills. In an effort to identify fossil artifacts and promote the discoveries in this area, he sent specimens from his collection to institutions and museums. Bob Cochrane was instrumental in the success of the Cluskin Hills Geological Society picnics and the many speakers who came to the area. He was even interviewed about his fossil collection in a CBC documentary series in the late 1950s.
The story of Cluskin Hill is kind of like the story of Pipestone Creek. Like Cluskin Hill, although we can talk about a few microfossils thing there, it was a social gathering. It was a place where people could meet. It was a landmark that everybody could find. Back in the 40s and the 50s was a site for the geological picnics. And Bob Cochrane was one of the prime movers, in with George Robinson. But Bob Cochrane basically had these geological picnics, invited people up from the University of Alberta. They talked about rocks and minerals, and of course Bob Cochrane introduced his fossil collection.
Another amateur fossil hunter was Bert Tiemann from Grand Prairie. During the 1980s, he was listed as one of the recognized paleontologists in Alberta. Field notes and journals documenting his discoveries are housed in the Grand Prairie Pioneer Museum. His discovery of a unique fish fossil resulted in this new species being named after him.